Connected Catalogue Project, University of St Malcolm, St John, Plymouth, connecting people with knowledge, heritage, creativity, employability, well-being, and each other. And when you put a PowerPoint together, it looks so organised and so planned, and this project so wasn't. It just evolved. We didn't actually set out with any set aims, but some good things happened, and we managed to make use of some challenging circumstances that I think most of us face, like no budget and time constraints, and some unpromising bits of the collection I think we've all got that we don't know what to do with sometimes. So I'm hoping that my experience might be useful, and maybe you'd like to hear it. So if that's not what we wanted to do, what did we set out to do? And it was to explore two issues that were just my interest, really. And that was access to and perception of archives. And this stemmed from a couple of years back when the country was in Downton Abbey fever. And everywhere you went, people were buying books or DVDs or CDs. But they were also having conversations in odd places. You'd sit on the bus or you'd be in the supermarket and you could hear people talking about suffragettes in World War I because it had been on Downton. And I started to think these informal exchanges were really interesting. So I did a bit of a straw poll and stopped some people and said, have you been to an archive and looked at anything or told them what you've got? And most of them said no. Either they didn't know what an archive did, or they felt intimidated. They felt they'd have to have a prior level of knowledge or a reason to go in or know what you were looking for. And that was the point that came about online. And we've talked about digital and how empowering it is. But a couple of people had been online and they'd come across an unfamiliar finding aid or a structure they weren't used to, and they'd given up because they didn't feel they could access and they felt a bit daft. They didn't want to ask. So sometimes where we see it as democratising, people had been sort of disempowered by it. So perception was the second thing. And I work in a small university, and our marketing department, the marketing guy talks about the black and white pictures of yesteryear. And it doesn't matter what I show him, that's what he still thinks of it. And there are staff that have been there for 20 years, and what they like is to see pictures of how it was. Like when they had curly perms or shoulder pads, or when the dining room was pink, or whatever it was. And that's what they really love, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that at all. But what they're missing sometimes is that social justice aspect. There isn't anything nostalgic or trivial about Orgreave or Hillsborough or Aberfan, and they're missing that transformative power of the knowledge and discovery and finding things out for yourself, facts and information. So out of that came this kind of vague idea. Could you involve people who wouldn't normally come in an archive, and could you give them a bit of an insight maybe into empowerment? So that's where it stemmed. So right, who were we going to do it with? And it was just at the beginning of these council spending cuts and services being pulled. And especially where we were, it was support networks for mental health and support networks for long-term unemployed. They were getting budget slashed. So we had a chat with some local organisations, and there are places like Mind, and I think most places have that. And there's Plus, and there's Avenues, and there are organisations with those sorts of names that work with people who've been out of work to try and get them work skills. And they told me something really interesting, that some of the biggest employers, when they turned to online recruitment tools, were using algorithms designed for dating agencies. Because they felt they could teach people skills. If you want them to do the till, you'll teach them that. But they couldn't teach them to get on with people. And workplace grievances were taking time and money to resolve and could lead to bad publicity. And you've only got to think of a recent party conference where nobody's talking about the party manifesto, but they're all talking about the picture of the guy sprawled on the floor. And big organisations don't need that. They don't want it. So they're looking for compatibility. But if you have been out of work for a while, or if you have a mental health issue, you've lost practice at that. You can't do those things. So first hurdle and you've fallen. So that was the plan. Could we address any of that? So we had some partners. We had a group of volunteers. We started off with 5 or 6 that were willing to come in and have a look at the archive and look at a couple of up-to-date skills for the CV. And the stuff that we didn't plan for, impact on well-being and discussions about respect and privilege, that came a bit later. So what were we going to do? What were we going to ask these people to do? How are we going to organise it? And we picked on individual projects because there's a sense of ownership, there's a sense of control, and if I haven't told you what to do, you can't fail. There's less of a failure option. And you're not coming to me all the time, am I doing it right? I don't know, it's yours, you do it. So they didn't feel they were going to somehow let themselves or us down. The only proviso, I mean, I didn't care what they picked. They could choose whatever topic they liked, but they had to work with another person, and that was the connected bit, and there had to be an output that they would share. So it could be a talk or a blog or an exhibition, didn't care what it was, but that was your connection bit. And then whatever they discovered, whatever info they produced, had to be recoverable by a future user via some sort of finding aid. And that was the catalogue bit, to explore what they were comfortable with searching and giving a different viewpoint. We did some basic skills. We did data protection, we did collection handling, confidentiality, copyright, because they'd be handy in a wider range of workplaces, so they're transferable skills. Family History Society came in and hosted some sessions, so they had some research sessions, and we got Wikimedia to do one of the editathons where somebody from Wikimedia comes in and explains basically how information gets online and how it's evaluated. And that was useful because Wiki is a big info provider, and to see how information gets online and how you can challenge it and how you can interrogate it, who wants me to know this, why do they want me to know it, that was really valuable, I felt. And it was non-threatening. It wasn't a lecture, it was wiki. They were comfortable with that. So that was something they could see how things worked, and it was something current for a CV as well. So what did they look like? What did they produce? Well, that's the unpromising material up in the corner under the plastic. And it was a collection that, we started in London, in 2 different places, in Battersea and Chelsea, and then we merged in 1923, and we moved to Plymouth in 1973. It's never had an archive manager or an archive presence. Sometimes library staff had taken an interest, sometimes academics, but there was no accession records, there was no original order, especially in this particular bit of the collection, which had just appeared from somewhere. So they couldn't really hurt it as a handling collection to get confident with. And there are some of the things they produced. The guy by the cabinets is Mark. He had an interest in maps, so he sorted the map collection. Dave, on the far side, he was World War I, he had an interest. They did a joint exhibition on how maps and technology affected how you develop war strategy. So they worked on that. Dave also did a flowchart, a rough guide to archives, because he thinks in flowcharts, that's what he likes. Just below that is a collection, students with 2 older people, and that's Dee and that's Ron. They wanted to look at craft skills. They liked the thought of passing on craft skills. They worked with the drama students to make poppies out of bottle tops collected around the campus. They did a play, the drama students based a play on World War I material from the archive that Dee researched. Ron did the poppies. Then they went to the speech and language therapy department and did a session with the Dementia Cafe and passed on some skills there. Mike, further across again, did a youth and community project with the Young People's Archive. This was young people who were not in education, to share their childhood experiences, because our archive's got stuff about Victorian children and their experiences of education. And he said, think about what your message would be. What do you want people to know now? What would you pass on? So they gave us a message about the best bit and the worst bit of being young at the moment, and catalogued that. He was also one of our students, and so was Agatha, and she's down in the corner with the blog. And sometimes our students come from, they're the first generation to go to university, so that can be a bit daunting, I think. So we were also a bit of a safe space to come and practice some skills and just have some time out. and to make sure they don't disappear in the Christmas holidays and never come back. Make sure we keep them. That's Agatha in the photo above her blog, and she's with another Mark. We had Mark 1 and we had Mark 2. Mark 2 was agoraphobic, depressed, suffered from, he had diabetes, and he was on steroid treatment for poor circulation and swelling of the legs. And he'd been made redundant from a very sort of physical job in the dockyard. And as he put it, I had a job 8 o'clock one morning, and by 8:15 I didn't. And that was a huge blow to him in many ways. So he was actually interested in photography. He'd gone home after this redundancy thing and gone to the front door, shut the door and sat down, really. Ordered his food online, did his medications online, and it just didn't go out if he could help it. But he did have an interest in photography, so we gave him a camera. Because he can hide behind that. That felt okay. So he went out and took photos of the campus on a good day, if he was feeling okay about being out. And if not, he took everybody's photos for their projects. So he was interacting with everybody as well. Agatha was blogging about everybody's project. She was a creative writing student. So they were connected in that way. So we made sure everybody linked up with everybody else and produced something to share. So, right, then as it grew, we ended up with about 35 volunteers over the period. They spent maybe 3 months in general on their project. So as it was starting to grow, you think we better evaluate, what are we doing? Why? So, had we had any impact? Had we set out with this project had we widened participation? Had we included people who hadn't been in an archive before? Yes. Did they feel empowered? Yes, because they were starting to go for jobs and courses. They were signing up for different things, exploring things in the local area. Had we explored the nature of archiving for 21st century? Why are we doing these things? Who are they for? We're not putting things in a box on a shelf. What are we doing? So we looked at that. Had we explored the archive's role in addressing wider issues? Was there potential there? And that's helpful. When we're all fighting to survive, then we have to demonstrate why we need to exist. Have we got a role there? So I think we'd looked at those things, the hows and the whys, and the why we were relevant at the moment. Right, was it worth it? Rewards and unexpected benefits. Well, we made use of material that we wouldn't have made use of otherwise. I was taken on as a fixed-term contract and part-time, so there wasn't a huge amount of time to spend on this, and we didn't have any budget at all, not a bean. So we'd managed to survive that, and I think probably lots of you will have the same constraints. Awkward material, no money, no time. Helped us demonstrate our worth, that was useful. Made me reevaluate my role, because as they got more confident and went out and were getting these job interviews, I said, well, what's driving this change? What's making what's making a difference? And they said, it's being trusted. You're valuing our opinions. We're being accepted into an institution, and not everybody on this project had had a positive experience with school or other authority. And they felt demoralised by this system where you sign on or you check in or you apply for this grant or that grant, or are you allowed to have this benefit, whatever else. And this was somehow more empowering than that. And they talked about privilege, of being given access to the collections. And I must admit, there are times when you go into work and there's a pile of uncatalogued stuff and a ton of emails, and privilege isn't what you feel. And we should. We so should. And it made me rethink that, and it made me reconnect with some of the aspects of my job that maybe I'd started to forget about, that we all do. Then there was health benefits. Mark II lost 3 stone being out and about. He came in one day and said, I've been to the doctor and I am no longer diabetic. Wonderful. He cut his anxiety medication and he cut the steroid medication for that was affecting his circulation. And that had a huge impact because his steroid medication could affect his control of his anger. It can make him angry. And by cutting that took that out. And because he was always so afraid he was going to say or do the wrong thing, by cutting that, he was then able to go off and find jobs and join courses. He felt more confident. Dave, the flowchart man, Mark 1, the student, carted him off because he said, I think you're dyslexic, mate. And he took him off to the student support and they tested him and he was. And Dave was in his 50s by then and he said, we didn't have dyslexia when I was in school. He said, we were just thick. And for him, that was a huge confidence boost, that there wasn't anything wrong with him. It was just a different way of learning. And his flowchart thing was really valuable and that was fine. And that did him huge amounts of good. So where we ended up, we had about 34 volunteers in the end. 17, 6 months after, we kept a running evaluation. We evaluated what happened throughout with a series of smileys. They come in the morning and you would tick from a grumpy face to a smiley face and how was your day. Evaluated what they'd done during the day. Were there any factors that had affected that? Had you had a row with somebody? Was your housing difficult? Whatever else. And then how they felt after the session. So they had a record of their activity and a record of mood. And it's dead simple. Didn't have to put their names on. It was for them and it's anonymised data for me. Kept in touch for about 6 months after the project. Some stayed much longer. 17 of them had paid work at some point during that. In fact, Dave got his first job in 10 years. And it was Royal Mail Christmas data inputting. But that's the first paid employment in 10 years, and he was so chuffed. 2 started little businesses, not connected with archiving or anything else, but one selling his photographs and another's gone dog walking, being out and about. 5 have gone into either further or higher education, and most of them have gone to do something else, some other volunteering, or they've joined something, or they've even just joined a society and gone out but done something. And as I say, Mark, no longer he's still managing his agoraphobia, fewer medications, less of what he does take. So that's got an impact on society, on NHS funding, and who feels empowered to manage. He now gives talks to groups, so he's managed to get over it that much. And they won an award. They got the 2014 Volunteer Team of the Year, so thank you Archive and Record Association. And they had a party and they invited all their key workers, those who had key workers, and their family to show what they were capable of. Because one of the things, if you've been on benefits or long-term unemployed for a certain length of time, at least where we work, you got put out to something like a charity shop or whatever to have some work experience, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they didn't all particularly value that experience in the same way. And to be given something where they could then show a video or a DVD or put that on their CV, like Dave said, I finally got something to be proud of for my CV. And this is after 56 years. And he just felt that was valued. They felt valued, they felt recognised, they felt that their capabilities were acknowledged. And I'll leave the last word with Dave, because he said, when you're unemployed or when you're not well, people fix you. People come along with these little fixes and they mean well, but it's therapy. And he said, this wasn't therapy, it was opportunity. And I don't think I can ask for a better endorsement than that. If anybody wanted to do some kind of project of a similar nature, or have done things like that already, and you want to add the information to maybe make some big data out of it, I think that could be really interesting. So please do ask if there's anything that you'd be interested in joining me in. And thank you for listening.